dear viewer, as you can see, I have a problem. I was working on some new Peacekeepers to reinforce my Enforcer army, and let's just say the dropship had a violent landing. As you can see, there's a number of shattered, broken models, and I thought to myself, this is an opportunity to repaint my small Enforcer army into a nicely painted, full-fledged 1250 point army in time for Adepticon in March. So, after I'd already started a few, I thought, why not make some content out of this? So as you can see, this Peacekeeper here is already Zenithal primed and got his shoulder pads painted, but I figured we'd jump right in and go through the process. Since I'm looking to knock out an army as quickly as I can, I'm going to go with speed paint for this round. The Zenithal prime already on, I'm going to apply a light dry brush over top, just to accent the white and really bring out those highlight areas. I've already applied Slaughter Red to the shoulder pads by Army Painter, and I'm going to apply Occultist Cloak to the main body. Speed paints go on nice and thin as transparent paint, so you'll want to make sure that you're loading your brush well, but not excessively. You don't want to get any excessive pooling or tidal marks from the drying process. You want enough on there that you can cover the area, and then it'll bleed into the recesses. It'll pull away from your hard edges, which is what's going to produce your contrast and really help sell that Zenithal in the highlight. The workflow, since I'm doing mostly speed paints here, is a little different than I traditionally do, so I'm going to jump right to the base. These are 3D printed bases by, I believe it's like Tixla Terrain. So I'm going to apply Runic Gray to the concrete areas of the base. There's also some texture paste that's already been down and dried up, and we'll get to that in a minute. With our gray down and drying, we're going to apply Ruddy Fur over the rockier areas of the base. This is going to make it look kind of dirty and grungy, and we're absolutely fine if it blends in with some of that Runic Gray that's already on there. This is going to make it look a little more weathered and filthy. Next, we're going over to Grim Black. I use Grim Black to apply to all the weapons and undersuit and exposed areas of the armor that aren't the gray armor plating. There's a handful of like piston-looking structures and thighs and whatnot. We'll want to go ahead and coat those. With my speed paint bases applied, I'm going to switch over to standard acrylic paints. I use Pro Acryl, but any brand that you prefer will work just as well. I'm going to use neutral gray and light neutral gray. Neutral gray will go down as my first highlight color, and then we'll build up to our highest edge highlights as we work our way up. If you're not interested in this step, you've got the speed paints applied, and you could skip forward and just hit a few of the other details on the model and have a perfectly fine tabletop ready model in very little time. But if you'd like, you can continue to follow along through the steps, we'll see how I build this up to the finished product. Our initial highlight complete, I'm going to use about a 2 neutral gray to 1 light neutral gray mixture to apply a second layer highlight. I'm going to apply this inside the initial highlight area in a smaller zone. The nice thing about doing the speed paints is that it provides us a very easy to follow blueprint of where these highlights are going to read off of the zenithal. And again, you can skip this step if you want to stick with just the highlights generated by the speed paint and the initial zenithal. Now I'm coming in with pure light neutral gray, and this is going to be used for my highest and hardest edge highlights. Thin brush, thin paint, and work in very small areas, mostly centered on the front side of our model where our light source is supposed to be coming from. Switching back to the base neutral gray, I'm going to apply a dry brush over the burst laser on the suit, and then I'm also going to nab a small brush and just hit some of the black areas that we painted earlier with a quick edge highlight to pronounce them a little more. Following that, we're going to use bold titanium white, and we're going to apply this to the visor and any glowy bits on the burst laser that we want to pronounce later. Next up, I'm using Red Oxide by Pro Acryl. It's kind of a reddish orange, so any comparable color will work if you're not using Pro Acryl paints. I'm going to use this to apply a highlight to the shoulder pads. I'm only going to do one layer of highlight for them because I don't want them to bounce as much as I do the rest of the armor. While we're working in red, I'll switch over to Pro Acryl's Burnt Red. This is a darker red tone. I'm going to use this to apply the V-shaped pattern on the chest plate of the Enforcer. This is a little bit of freehanding, and it's not my strongest suit, and I know there's a lot of people in the hobby who feel that way. I find thin paint, fine point brush. I'm working with a size 1 at this point. You'll see that I do still make some mistakes, and we'll clean up as we go. You can see that entire process. Now we're going to nab a drop of fluorescent red to those eyes, just to make them pop off that face and make them glowy and scary. While we're sticking with the bright colors, we're going to switch over to Pro Acryl Sky Blue. We're going to use this for the knuckles on the energy gauntlet there and the glowy bits off of the burst laser. Time for a little cleanup. I'm switching over to Pro Acryl's Coal Black. I'm going to use this to clean up the red that overspilled from the chest piece, the blue that kind of went nuts inside the burst laser. I'm just using a very thin and fine point brush to go ahead and just cover up some of those imperfections that we created in the process here. Next up, I'm going to use a little bit of the Army Painter Fanatics rust effect, but honestly, any dark orange will work for this. I'm just going to kind of stipple it around on that girder that's sticking out of the base, just to add a little color and pop to the base. Now we're back to the Coal Black to rim that base. This is bringing us to the end of this little paint journey, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me and watching this video. If you haven't, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and maybe even subscribe to the channel if you're not. With that done, let's have a look at the finished product.